right, everyone, welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. Today, I have with me from ESPN, Mina Kimes, uh, has doing a lot of draft coverage right now on her podcast, the Mina Kimes Show, featuring Lenny. Talked a lot about the Chargers last week and their dilemma at 5. Mina, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we actually I think do a decent amount of Chargers talk on the Mina Kimes show as far as a pod that covers the entire league. So if you're listening to this and you're a Chargers fan, I think you'll find something to like. You can also watch us on YouTube if you get your pods that way.
Yeah, I wanted to start first with just the Chargers offseason in general here. I remember you saying on NFL Live after Staley and Telesco had gotten fired, the Chargers were entering this phase where what they were doing was unsustainable, right? They had all these expensive contracts, a lot of injuries, sort of an older roster without some of their key core players. Harbaugh and Hortiz come in here, and it's, a nuke to the Telesco nucleus, so to speak, where Keenan Allen's traded, Mike Williams is cut. They bring back Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack on these one-year pay cut restructured deals. What have you made of their moves as we get towards the draft here?
Uh, I think Telesco left the new regime in a pretty difficult situation. I'll start there. I think that's something that had been underrated too, generally, by a lot of folks when talking about the Chargers. This is a roster that was old, top heavy, with a fair amount of holes. So coming in, um, there were difficult decisions to be made, which you outlined. Mixture of surprising and not surprising. Wasn't surprising to see them move on from Mike Williams. Was surprised to see them keep both of the pass rushers. So obviously with the restructure. And then I think the Allen one also was surprising because I think of the four players, he was the one who I thought they would keep actually. And I do understand why they did it, but obviously that leaves them, and this is no surprise to anyone, in a pretty difficult situation with regards to their receiver group. But kind of all had to be done, ripping the Band-Aid and trying to set up the team for long-term success is a pretty pivotal offseason, however.
Right. And what do you make of their coaching staff here that they brought in? I assume Jim Harbaugh, when we talk about him in the media, is pretty popular with everyone.
Yeah.
Somebody that I know is less popular with football media is Greg Roman, in terms of him as
Yeah.
offensive coordinator. Do you think that, he can work with Justin Herbert in terms of this philosophy of bolstering the run game to set up the pass?
Yeah, I think he can. I think Roman gets a little bit of a raw deal, honestly, because that Baltimore offense, yes, the passing game was limited, but it was still extremely efficient and really creative when it came to the run game. And they even this year with the new offensive coordinator, they're still using a lot of the same concepts with great success on the ground. I think for how that will translate with Herbert and this offense, uh, it really comes down to run pass balance. Like when we talk about running the ball better, um, sort of, that doesn't necessarily mean running it more or running it on
Right.
early downs or, so I think for me, it's a matter of like, Herbert is such a different quarterback from Lamar, obviously, that I'm kind of going to withhold judgment on it. And Roman obviously has a career before Lamar Jackson, obviously it was San Francisco and all that. But I kind of want to see, okay, what does it look like when we talk about fixing this run game, and we'll see what they do with the offensive line. Um, Edwards was, by the way, one of my favorite signings of the offseason. I think he's super underrated back, really, really good in the Ravens, and the value you got him at was tremendous. So I want to see what does it look like, and then I want to see, okay, how is he approaching run pass balance with this quarterback? And I think you kind of have to wait and see. Other side of the ball, by the way, part of the reason I love the Jim Harbaugh signing or hiring rather was that he brought Jesse Minter with him from
Right.
Michigan. Such an exciting and fun hire. So I think the coaching staff is a plus in an offseason that obviously came with some other more difficult decisions.
Yeah. This coaching staff, I think, is really built out. And Harbaugh even said himself, he wants to set up a pipeline of coaches, even for when Jesse Minter does get hired somebody else, or, just people start leaving the coaching staff and they get other jobs. to kind of keep, self-replenishing. And I thought that was interesting because you never hear coaches openly sort of admit that about wanting to build that structure, but it seems like Harbaugh is keen on it. Let's get to the draft now. I think you have gotten some flack from Chargers fans for, the trade down stance to a degree. And I considered myself as someone before the Keenan Allen trade who maybe leaned a little bit more towards trading down. But then the Keenan trade happens, and now you are relying on Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, who is this big wild card heading into year two in
Yeah.
terms of what this, management's expectations are of him. So, as someone who is pretty firmly, I think, in the trade down from five camp, what are some of your key reasons that you consider yourself to be there?
Well, the number one reason is just there's so many needs on this roster. And I think again, I think this was like underappreciated when people talked about the team in recent years. But outside of receiver, pass catcher, generally, I know you signed some tight ends. You're probably wanting offensive tackle, center is another huge need. I don't think Lindsey's announced his retirement yet, right? But that seems to be
That seems to be
on
the
the
direction.
table. Yeah. Defensive tackle, linebacker, corner. I mean, there's more needs than none needs. So if there is an opportunity on the table to trade down and pick up a significant draft haul, I think you have to seriously consider it. But the devil is in the details, right? Like, what does that trade look like? How far are you going in the first round? Do you think you can still take one of the obviously not that the big three of wide receivers, but do you think you can take someone from the next tier depending on where you trade down to? All of these things matter. So I'm it's not trade down no matter what for me. And then the other thing is, because it's an interesting situation for LA at five now with the rise of JJ McCarthy up people's draft boards because suddenly, that was the spot where it's like, okay, for a while the thought was if you're Minnesota or whoever you want McCarthy, you're probably going to have to jump New York. So five seems like the sweet spot. But now we're hearing about McCarthy at three or four, which is crazy, right? Or three, another quarterback, and maybe the pass trade down. But the point is, suddenly you're now potentially competing with other teams in the top five for that haul. But then on the other side, there's multiple counterparties as well, right? It's not just Minnesota; it's potentially Denver and Vegas. So you've got kind of like I think I posted the Office GIF where it's like Michael Scott and Dwight, and they're all like, but it really does feel like on both sides of this potential trade equation, there's multiple partners. So for the Chargers, because as you said correctly, need aligns so well with where you're taking, I do think there is a high bar for trading down now. And also, I just absolutely adore these top three receivers.
Yeah. Let's talk about the wide receiver class for a bit. Obviously, everyone knows kind of about the top three guys, but in terms of evaluating it for the Chargers here, do you think they sort of, I guess, have to wind up with one of those top three guys? Or let's say they get that 11 and 23 package that's been discussed from Minnesota. Are there also guys like Adonai Mitchell or Brian Thomas that you would also like for them there, or some round two targets?
Those are the two who I think come to mind. I think if you were to trade down, I would love AD Mitchell at like 23, um, which is maybe a little bit rich for him. But I don't think Thomas Jr., yeah, obviously brings the size and the speed. I think, though, you want someone, and I'm not saying even I have Mitchell above him, I don't, but I do think Mitchell is a little bit more well rounded. I mean, what you need well, you need every kind of wide receiver, to be honest. But you can get like I would love to see the Chargers pick up like a shiftier slot type maybe later in the draft. But at the top of the draft, both of those guys are kind of your true number one X's when, they give you that contested catch ability as well. So I'd be a little bit apprehensive of Thomas Jr. at 11. But he's a really good player too. So I guess my preference would be if let's say you were to pick up 11 and 23 to hit a different position with 11 and then pick Mitchell with 23 would be my preference.
Yeah. Um, talking about the top four draft order, and you sort of mentioned it, where these all these crazy storylines now. I remember talking with Field Yates on a podcast a couple months ago, and we were just like, oh, well, the top three quarterbacks go, and then Marv goes, and then the draft starts at 5 with the Chargers, and it just became way more complicated than that. You now have like, is Jaden Daniels going into the whole Daniels May debate going there? Are the Patriots likely taking a quarterback? Could they, potentially trade out of that pick? JJ McCarthy hype. How do you, I guess, evaluate? And I'm sure you also talk to some people who have some information on this. How do you kind of parse, I guess, what's real and what's not right now?
I think the as far as like the what's going to happen side of it, I really end up disentangling that from how do I feel about the prospects because it doesn't really matter. Um, and for me, it's just kind of identifying who are the people who tend to be correct about these things, whether it's Schefter, or someone like Daniel Jeremiah, who I just had on my podcast, who's very well connected around the league, and just kind of seeing what have they been saying. Do you see multiple people saying the same thing? Uh, tonally, where does it sound like things are going? Because um, when you're trying to read the tea leaves, you kind of have to look to multiple people, right? And look at their track record in the past of have they been right before?
Yeah. It's certainly just hard to kind of put all that information together. Certainly, when people are
Yeah.
doing these mock drafts, I think that's been kind of the toughest part. Outside of the first round, are there any positions kind of? I mean, we kind of mentioned that they need every single position. But
Yeah.
in terms of these, let's say, top 100 prospects, given that the Chargers have that extra, number 110 pick from the Keenan Allen trade, um, what are some of the positions you'd like to maybe see them attack with this Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter scheme, or adding kind of the offensive component into it in those first 100 picks, maybe outside of the first round?
Yeah, defensively, I think you want athletes in that front seven, guys who the Minter scheme is not too dissimilar from what you saw the Ravens. I'm sure you guys have talked about this a lot. The Ravens do last year in terms of running a lot of simulated pressure. You guys have guys who are a threat, pardon me, to blitz, but then they're dropping into coverage. So you need players on your front seven. You need to get younger, faster, have guys who can play multiple positions, who can do different things. So I think. Uh, there's no like exact archetype for like you want this size and these traits for an outside linebacker or whatnot. But I do think those are qualities that are pretty universal for those coaches. So I have to think Minter too, coming from the college ranks, will have a pretty strong idea of the defensive players in the front seven that he likes because he's watched them closely, which I think is kind of like, by the way, obviously Harbaugh too. Like people always talk about like, oh, Michigan, so he's going to want Junior Colson, right, the linebacker, but I don't think that's true. I think necessarily it might be, but it's not. My point is, they also had a very close view of players on the other side of the football, and I think that is kind of like a sneaky advantage, actually. To be honest, head into the draft is like they've been watching these guys more closely than the rest of the NFL, and I'm sure have pretty strong opinions about that. Um, so I have to think that you'll probably try to fill that out in the mid rounds. Corner I mentioned is something. I think this is a pretty decent quarterback draft. Um, that's one where too. I think if you did do a trade and amassed picks, I think you would be able to use a top 60 pick on a pretty solid corner because I have to think the way the draft is shaking out, at least with my mocks, you're getting some pretty talented guys falling into the second round. And then I mentioned the receiver and offensive tackle on the other side. But I think again, if you were to move down, depending on what you do with those first round picks, I think in the second round you could pick up a receiver who's like a really nice fit and like complementary to the players that you already have. Actually, I do love that. Speaking of Michigan guys, I think Roman Wilson would be an amazing fit in the Chargers offense, in the second or whatever. So that's a player I really like.
Roman Wilson is interesting because Keenan Allen walks out the door, and you kind of
Yeah.
get like the perfect archetype replacement to some extent for Keenan Allen. Maybe is not thrilling to the fans who want like the speed aspect, but certainly if you're just kind of starting this from scratch anyway, and you're just kind of seeing what else you get from the other receivers. I think getting a nice solid receiver there in that second round, like Roman Wilson, would be a big help in terms of analyzing some of what these other teams are going to try to do. Who are your biggest like question mark teams in the draft? Maybe in that first round outside of the Chargers.
Yeah, the whole thing hinges on whether the Patriots will actually move off of 3. Really, I think. I mean, you could talk about it with Commanders and whatnot, but I think um, the NFL seems pretty divided right now, or at least the few folks I've talked to, over whether they're actually considering a trade, and they're in a unique position, obviously. With an offense that has a lot of needs. I think most people agree it's not a great situation for a rookie quarterback. So if they were to draft one, he would have to sit. Do they like whoever is there, whether it's May or Daniels, because nobody really knows who's going to go second? Do they like both enough to stick and turn down a potential haul from another team, Minnesota being the most obvious candidate? So I find that pick super interesting. And then I think the Bears at 9 are the other team that really fascinate me, because that's another area where I think you might see a potential trade up candidate. Maybe someone wants one of the 3 receivers like Buffalo or whatever, and they have a lot of needs. They're like a good team with still every mock I see with the Bears has them taking like different positions. So if there
Mm-hmm.
was an opportunity for them to trade down, they like to trade down in amass picks. I think they might consider it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have pegged receiver there with that second pick, but maybe it's not that obvious, and they are already got DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, so it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's not necessarily a necessity for them. I'll get you out on this. Mina Kimes' ultimate prediction for what happens with the Chargers on draft night is what?
Um, I think that you end up sticking because I think there's a big trade ahead of you. That would be
Mm,
my guess. Now, what I think might happen and make people very angry is I think you might take Alt instead of the receiver, which would not be my choice, to be honest.
mm.
I would rather take Neighbors or Harrison Jr. But or Odunze, to be honest. But I think that could happen. And boy, I have to think Chargers fans would be. I don't know how you feel about that, but I know that there would definitely be some backlash to that pick.
Yeah, Marv is easily my favorite. Neighbors is close to him, but
Amazing player.
I think that yeah, the I we do a live draft show every year, and so
Get ready, yeah.
we did the Quentin Johnston pick last year, and some of us were like biting our hands, and some of us were like, well, it could be good. So
It's not my
it's
favorite pick. Yeah.
so now we're hoping for better outcomes this year. Mina, I'll get you out on this. You are an absolute inspiration to me, and ultimately
Oh,
why I do
thank you.
this. So
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Thank
thank
you.
you for hopping on the show today. And any final thoughts on the draft or anything going on in the league?
Listen, guys, there's been like a little bit of a critical tone or concern. I know I've been like hard on the roster, but you have Justin Herbert, and you have
True.
great coaching staff, and I think we've seen turnarounds can be accelerated pretty quickly if you have the quarterback. And I have made no secret of the fact that I am a huge fan of his. I am part of the Justin Herbert mafia in the NFL media. Next year, I joked about this when you guys traded Keenan Allen. Next year, we're gonna feast on excuses for Herbert because he's not
Yeah,
gonna have
Theo Ash posted when Roman got hired. It's like, oh, we got another excuse in the bank for our Justin Herbert defense.
He's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Again, check out the Mina Kimes show. I promise, Chargers fans, you'll find a lot to like.
Check out the Meet a Time show featuring Lenny as always, and bolt up.